One of the things that Yu-Gi-Oh! Players find frustrating is the lack of comprehensive deck tutorials out there. Magic the Gathering has a thing called deck primers, but basically all we have over here is coverage of whatever deck won a major event, which can be complicated and use a lot of high-level terminology that new players aren't ready for yet, or just simple deck profiles made by more casual players. But there's not really a lot of long-form, heavily instructive informational videos out there, so I figured with the release of the Crimson King structure deck, I would go ahead and do a deck primer on the Red Dragon Archfiend / Resonator strategy. Needless to say, I was really excited about this structure deck because I'm a massive fan of 5Ds, and my wife and I will host cosplay meetups at conventions here in the Southeast, and Jack Atlas is always my go-to character from Yu-Gi-Oh! With those things. So I have a very sentimental attachment to this strategy, and after years of there not being any TCG product based around Jack Atlas, it was really cool to see they finally did that and gave us a structure deck of all things. So I went a little bit overboard, and my local store hooked me up with an entire display case of the structure deck, and so I can build a fully competitive version of the deck with 3 structure decks as you would, and then have other ones to give away to my friends so that we can all do a sealed-only tournament with just 1 structure deck out of the box at my house. This kind of thing will be common as a side event at YCS's and larger tournaments, so it's not just something we're pulling out of our rear ends for fun. It is something that is based in a potentially competitive metagame that you may run into in the next 6 months to a year, especially if this structure deck doesn't sell well, because it doesn't really have much in the way of competitive reprints in it. So it's very possible that they could use unsold structure decks from this as a YCS side event. So understanding the unique metagame of every match is a mirror match and you're playing with this deck out of the box is interesting, and I think that will make for a fun video later down the road. And then I also want to talk about the implications of this strategy in Common Charity. There's basically me and one other person on the Common Charity Discord that keeps the lights on with the Common Charity Resonator / Red Dragon Archfiend strategy. And that strategy got boosted exponentially due to this structure deck and is basically on almost on the level that the deck was at fully constructed before this. So it's pretty crazy, so I do want to talk about that as well. So generally with these deck primers, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of a strategy, you know, why you would pick that strategy, the history of the archetype and how it's evolved throughout the years, a fully modern competitive deck profile that hopefully stands up to scrutiny over time, and then talk about maybe some non-standard card choices that are still worth considering that have synergy with the archetype, and then we'll go through some combos. As always, feel free to use the timestamps on the timer below to skip around whatever chapter appeals to you, but I would highly, highly recommend that you listen to the entire thing, even though this may be a long-winded video, to understand the full context of everything I'm going to be talking about. In the 5Ds anime, Jack Atlas's deck was never really cohesive or made up of powerful cards seen in the TCG. The original Red Dragon Archfiend had the highest base attack of any generic level 8 synchro from the original wave of synchros released in the Duelist Genesis, but people would much more often go for cards like Stardust Dragon or Colossal Fighter for their utility. The original Dark Resonator was a level 3 tuner that once per turn could not be destroyed by battle, so it was a pretty solid tuner for its era but never really saw much play. In the Arc 5 era, Jack Atlas would return in the anime and have something much closer to resembling a cohesive strategy, with more Resonators and a series of Fiend-type red main deck monsters. The side set High Speed Riders was printed around this time, which also brought in the series of hot Red Dragon Archfiends from the 5Ds manga. These were pretty powerful, but a recurring problem with the RDA strategy is how often you were locked into only being able to summon Dark Dragon synchros after utilizing the effects of a lot of the main deck monsters. Red Resonator is a level 2 tuner that upon normal summon can special summon any level 4 from your hand, which is pretty strong, and upon special summon could increase your life points by the attack of another monster you control. This monster actually sees more play outside of this strategy than in it, as has recently been in many topping sprite lists, since it's a level 2 monster that can increase your own life, allowing you to cheese out a win in the awful time rules. The same can be said for Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend, released also in the Arc 5 era as an anime-exclusive card. This card sees play in Dragon Link extra decks as a way to burn your opponent in time as well. In 2020, in the final set of the Vrains era Eternity Code, we would get several powerful Resonator cards, including a card called Resonator Command, which is a quick play spell while at the cost of discarding a Resonator, lets you search literally any level 4 or lower Fiend in the entire game, which at the time of writing this is nearly 450 different monsters that it can search. Finally, Crimson Resonator was the best Resonator to date for the strategy, and was clearly designed specifically to work with the at the time OCG exclusive Red Supernova Dragon. Crimson Resonator and any level 4 Fiend resulted in this powerful monster, when summoned off the effect of the level 6 Red Rising Dragon. This finally brings us to the era of the structure deck support, and it's overall a huge step in the right direction for the strategy. Most of the new cards are pretty powerful and solve problems of consistency that the deck struggled with before, but more on that when we get to the deck profile. Alright, let's go ahead and crack one of these bad boys open. So I've already opened the 3 that I used to make my deck out of, but I figured let's go ahead and open a 4th on camera here so you guys get to see what's in it. This is pretty much a 1-to-1 from the Japanese version, which I've also opened on the channel. There is nothing different as far as which cards are included, I can tell, which is actually a little bit of a bummer because I was hoping they were going to include a powerful staple reprint in here to kind of help this deck sell. But they didn't do that. There's no common imperm, there's no prosperity, there's no... I think Crossout Designator would have been a great choice for this deck, because that's not a card that's seeing a lot of play right now, but can you imagine like a common Crossout Designator in here, or even a super rare one? That would have been a really great choice, but they didn't do that. And they've changed the rarities of the new cards that come in here, which I'm not completely crazy about, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Another thing that's worth noting about this is how much they've changed the packaging. So I originally thought that they were going for a starter deck size box here, but it turns out they've actually gone even smaller than that. So not only is it shorter, but it is also thinner than any other structure deck packaging we've had before. And this is the first time that structure deck packaging has changed in this much of a meaningful way since 2011. So prior to that, the 5D structure decks had like that weird slanted top to them, if you guys remember those, and they went to a standard box after that, and it's been that standard box ever since. The way they package the inside has changed a little bit, but the box was identical for more than a decade, and they've finally changed it to cut costs, I'm assuming, and create less waste, which is fine. There's actually just 2 little tabs right here that's holding the top together, and when you tear those, it just kind of comes right open. So it's easier to get open, although there's not really a permanent way to reseal it. And the way the deck is in there is very similar to the Speed Duel starter decks, which again, I'm not crazy about, but they've gotten rid of they obviously have gotten rid of the rule book a long time ago. You have to like fold in this flap right here to get the thing to come out. I don't know how I really feel about that. I don't like that very much. I prefer the cards to go in a little tray, but the deck is in there sideways. But yeah, no more rule book, no more QR code, no more Master Duel advertisement or an advertisement for the latest set, none of that stuff. It's just the deck and the playmat, and that is it. And even then, I really think they could probably cut the playmats out of these things because nobody really uses them. Alright, so we have Soul Resonator, which is our new starter. It's an excellent normal summon, and it's worth mentioning that its effect triggers on normal or special summon, which is pretty important. The print quality on the ultra rares in this is also really, really nice. They look fantastic. But this was a super rare in the OCG version. The Vision Resonator is another new Resonator. It's literally scoop shipping the card, guys, and I love it. It's great. I love the Carly Fortune Lady reference there. This card has 2 effects, and you're going to be adding it from the graveyard back to your hand off the effect of Synchron Resonator a lot, which makes its effect to special summon it from hand live again, which is really cool. I'm actually totally fine with this. We have another ultra rare Red Dragon Archfiend printing. It's nice to have a sort of mass-produced ultra rare that's modern, so I don't have to use my old ones from like 2008 or from the 5D's Legendary Collection. So this is actually pretty big for Edison format. I'm really glad that we have more ultra rare Red Dragon Archfiends in circulation that I can put it on my Edison decks. And then ultra rare Red Rising Dragon is a pretty huge rarity bump for this card that only has 1 other printing in common. In the OCG it has foil printings, but over here it only has the common printing. So I'm happy with that, but I would have probably taken this as a super rare, or even the Resonators as a super rare. There's our token card, which I showed off in the OCG version. We've got super rare Red Supernova Dragon, super rare King Calamity, which will probably get banned soon, and then super rare Scar Red Dragon Archfiend. So a lot of people are probably going to mispronounce this guy as Scarred Dragon Archfiend. and that may have been a poor localization change. So if it's pronounced Scar to Dragon Archfiend, then I'm going to continue to say Scar Red Dragon Archfiend. It's going to be another Baroness or another Blood Rose Dragon type of situation where I just don't say the localized name because it sucks. But they made this guy a super rare, which I wish they would have gone with ultra rare with him, but one of the best new cards in the deck. Bone Archfiend is the card that I feel like is the most necessary and most powerful, like, new card, the most welcome new card they added to the strategy. Maybe not the overall most powerful, that might go to Soul Resonator, but I think this card was the most necessary and one I appreciate the most for the deck. Dark Resonator, Creation Resonator is really cool because this was like an $8 card for a while, and now we finally have another common printing, which is really nice. I don't know why this card was expensive for so long, but it did only have 2 printings. Synchron Resonator, red, crimson. We got some generic Jack Atlas cards like Vice Dragon, Battle Fader. That will be really powerful in the sealed only environment. Red Sprinter's kind of okay. Red Warg. Common printing of Wandering King Wildwind's going to be huge for common charity. Phantom King Hydride, which I did not even know this card existed. He has a common printing in a Zexal era set, thanks to the fact that he's a 5Ds manga card. Magical King Moonstar, another 5Ds manga card. Absolute King Backjack. A reprint of Assault Mode is really cool. A common printing is interesting. I don't know what implications this is going to have for common charity format. I may play around with the Assault Mode stuff, but currently my common charity version of Resonators that I'm brewing does not include any of these cards, but it's worth considering, I suppose. So we got the Assault Beast and the Psy Reflector. So Ascator Dawnwalker and Fire Ant Ascator common is really, really cool. This card makes an instant level 8 synchro at the cost of a discard because it summons itself and this from your deck, which is awesome in synchro strategies. The only problem with it here is you cannot make the new Scar Red Dragon Archfiend with these because it requires dark monsters, and these are not dark. So unfortunately we cannot go that route. So you may be better off with the Supay Duskwalker to make Red Rising Dragon, but even then the Red Rising Dragon doesn't do anything unless you also have a Resonator in the graveyard, so we'll talk about that when we get to it. Common printing of Danger Nessie is pretty big. Danger Chupacabra. Do not play this card. I'm so sick of seeing this card in people's Red Dragon Archfiend decks, and people did it for so long that they reprinted it and included it in this deck. Stop playing this card in your deck. There's better things you can play now. Absolute Power Force is a common. The new Crimson Gaia card is awesome. I've seen people going back and forth between 2 or 3 of this, so we'll kind of see how we feel there. Resonator Engine, Resonator Call. These 2 cards are good. Burning Soul as a common. This was just printed, I think, last year or 2021, actually, in King's Court. Pot of Extravagance, another common printing in Pot of Extravagance. That's nice, but at the same time, we already had one in the Albaz deck, so Fiendish Golem is another really cool new card. I'm debating adding a copy of Fiendish Golem and Fiendish Chain to the deck because sometimes you hard open the Crimson Gaia, and then you don't have anything really to search off of the Vision Resonator. Why is it called Vision Resonator and not Fortune Resonator? Red Zone is a reference to the lyrics of the song Clear Mind, but also a very powerful trap in this deck. King Synchro, Red Rain already had a common printing. Common printing of Time to Stand Up is really cool. I wish there was a way to get this card into the graveyard easier, because it would be another negate for your end board if this was in your graveyard. Its actual effect as a trap on the field is not very good, but its graveyard effect to negate stuff is really good. I just wish there was an easy way to get it to the graveyard without playing Foolish Burial Goods. Fiendish Chain for the Fiendish Golem. With that Powerful Rebirth, Assault Mode Activate. Terrorism the Overroot is probably the best generic trap in this deck for playing this sealed. Even if you're just cracking open 3 of these and making the deck, you'll probably want to be on that. And then for the common Dragon reprints, we've got Common Scarlight now, Common Abyss, which is huge for common charity, Common Bane, and Common Red Nova Dragon, which I guess will be our end boss in the common charity version because we won't be able to play Red Supernova. So why play this strategy? What are the pros and cons? Well, for the pros, the boss monsters are unbelievably strong. So Red Supernova Dragon can easily win a game on the spot. It usually hits the field with around 6,000 attack at least. And the fact that it banishes all cards your opponent controls does punish aggro monster heavy decks and backer heavy decks as well. Especially because it's much harder to recur banished spells and traps than it is monsters. Hot Rod Dragon Archfiend Abyss is a very specific kind of Omni-Negate that can negate any card in the field, and that combined with some of the searchable spells and traps, as I mentioned, can even negate Dark Ruler no more. And the new support added to the deck, basically every new card is a card that searches another card. So while there are hands that can brick, it is remarkably consistent, and you're usually always able to get to something resembling an end board while not having to sacrifice key pieces of non-engine. To me, one of the essential qualifiers of any competent modern deck is, can it play its own strategy consistently enough and still have enough room for maybe 3 to 4 play sets of non-engine, whether that be hand traps or going second board breakers. If you need to play like 21 of combo pieces to get to your end board, then your deck is probably not going to play very well in any current modern metagame. As for the cons, the deck is very one-note. It is a synchro build-a-board strategy that sets up a million negates. That kind of strategy isn't exactly anything new. We've seen that before, and even if it is consistent, it loses to all the same stuff that those strategies have always lost to. So things like Dimensional Barrier kills the deck. Things like Lava Golem in Sphere mode, your boss monsters are incredibly susceptible to that and cannot interact with those cards in any way. And then there are some really obvious choke points that if you don't have a way to play through those types of interruptions, your combo pretty much stops. So if they negate something like Red Rising Dragon or Crimson Resonator at the specific intervals, you really can't extend through that very well like other decks can. And then Shifter just absolutely wrecks the deck. Like, you cannot play through Shifter at all unless you have like Called by the Grave or something else to negate it. Or if you have Cross Out and a Shifter in main deck for that. The reason why decks like Tear Lament were really strong is they had continuous spells and traps that constantly put up disruption in their back row. They didn't set up a million negates, they just had cards that continuously recurred themselves. And then the reason why, again, decks like Unchained are powerful right now is because they have multiple different ways of interaction. They have searchable spells and traps. They don't just rely on a field full of monsters that are all Omni-Negates to facilitate their win condition. And so a deck like Resonator or Red Dragon Archfiend that just does that one thing, and granted it does have some spell and trap cards that are searchable that can act as backup and disruption through other means, but essentially the deck's core strategy is that one note, just summon a bunch of synchros and build a board, and that is just becoming a little bit outdated in today's game.
Okay, so let's go over a basic example of a modern competitive deck profile for this strategy. So this is playing it pure, and before I get too carried away, I want to talk specifically about Crossout Designator. So this is a card that has had a lot of controversy since its release, and is a popular choice in some rogue decks, but this card was very overhyped for its perceived counterplay against a lot of hand traps and particular hate cards. In reality, it has underperformed. It didn't live up to expectations. And so a lot of decks that lose to very specific hand traps like Droll or Nibiru or Shifter tend to want to play this card for extra protection because it seems like a great counterplay against those cards. But in testing, a lot of times with this deck, it doesn't seem like it gives me that much value. So for instance, I have the Droll and the Nibiru in there as crossout targets, and then I found out that my opponent is on Shifter, and Shifter absolutely just bricks this deck. It cannot play through Shifter at all. So it's like, is it worth it to then add a Shifter as a crossout target and add yet another brick one of to the deck? Or try to keep the card count lower to make it more consistent. So you basically have a couple of options here. You either include the crossout and the respective targets for it, and you pick those targets based on your local metagame, and you try to keep your list around 44-ish cards. Or you cut the crossouts and the targets all together, and you keep your list at exactly 40, playing the most optimal ratios you can. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some of the new cards. So the new Soul Resonator. This guy is a level 3 tuner, and he is the best normal summon we have in the deck. He searches any level 4 lower fiend on normal or special, and he can banish himself from grave to protect your dragon synchros from being destroyed, which is pretty helpful. Now, if you are in a situation where you have to normal summon this guy, it is not optimal. Typically, you'd think this is the best Resonator in the deck, but really you want to open Crimson if you can. You should know what Crimson does, but we'll go over it anyway, because the fact that his effect triggers on special means we can get that search off of whether or not we hard open it and normal it, or if we summon it off of Crimson Resonator. So hands where you're forced to normal summon the Soul Resonator can be pretty crusty, but there is a 1-card combo. It's like a 1+1, the normal summon plus a discard that gets you to a end board with multiple interruptions. It gets you to at least Abyss and Dissipator with the trap set, which is at least 3 interruptions, plus the protection of the Soul Resonator in graveyard. It's very much like Salamangreat Balinx in a way, the way it protects your cards, so that's pretty good. Solid choice overall. It's also the best level 3 Resonator, so it has Power Crept, Creation Resonator, and also like Dark Resonator if for whatever reason you were on that before. Those cards are now Power Crept, and Soul Resonator is the best level 3. The next one we have is the Vision Resonator. This one you would summon off of the Crimson Resonator effect as well, and when it is sent to the graveyard for a Synchro Summon, you get to search a spell or trap that mentions RDA by name, which is not as many cards as you would think, and I actually don't like the design of how they have based the searching around cards that mention Red Dragon Archfiend, because I would have preferred if they mention a Dark Dragon Synchro and that all of the support was consistent around that, because then any of the cards that lock you into Dark Dragon Synchros would be searchable off of this, and I don't even think it would make the card that much more powerful. I think it would still be fairly balanced because so many of the cards still lock you. But basically, you have a few targets you search off of this. Mainly you search the Crimson Gaia, which searches the red zone, which we'll talk about. And then when you synchro also using the Synchron Resonator, you get to add the Vision Resonator back to your hand, and it is now live to be special summoned back out of your hand because you control a level 5 or higher monster. So that's what we use that for. It's another great level 2. Crimson Resonator is, in my opinion, still the best Resonator in the game. It is the one that you want to hard open if you have a choice, and this card still seems like it was designed specifically with Red Supernova in mind, because when you control exactly a Dark Dragon Synchro and nothing else, you can special summon 2 Resonators with different levels from your deck. So usually you would get Soul and Vision, or you would get Soul and Synchron depending on your setup. The Soul Search on Special Summon can also add you the Synchron or one of the non-tuners that you're missing depending on your line. So opening this guy is extremely good. He has that Cyber Dragon-like self-special summoning effect, which is really nice. And you just want to open this guy if you can help it. So we're playing 2 of the Synchron Resonator. This is exactly correct. You don't want to play any more or any less than this. It doesn't suck to hard open it because it special summons itself from your hand only if you control a Synchro monster. It does not matter what kind of Synchro monster, you can special summon this guy from your hand for free. So it doesn't suck to hard open it, but you can search it off of Soul. You can special summon it off of Crimson. And when it is sent to the graveyard for Synchro material, it can add back a Resonator from graveyard back to hand, which is not a hard once per turn, and it's how you're going to recycle the Vision to use its in-hand effect to special summon itself out, or give you a discard fodder for later, or a card for follow-up for next turn. The new non-tuner Bone Archfiend, in my opinion, is the most necessary new piece of support to elevate the power of this strategy. So previously, the non-tuner Fiend monsters that you would use to Synchro Summon in this strategy didn't really do a whole lot aside from providing themselves as a free body, such as the Wandering King Wildwind, which we'll talk about. But this guy not only provides himself as a body, but potentially can be 2 bodies if you open Crimson Resonator and you have to hard normal him, which is not a bad place to be, and I'll go into that. But it sets up a combo for later. It lets you modulate the level of your other Synchrons, and the fact that Foolish Burial dumps any Fiend tuner into the graveyard means you get access to whichever Resonator you're missing when you go into Red Rising Dragon, as Red Rising can revive whatever you sent from deck to grave. or you can get this Obsessive Oovaloop, which we'll talk about. So Bone Archfiend is an absolute mandatory 3-of. It's, in my opinion, it may not be the objectively strongest piece of new support, but it is, in my opinion, the most necessary new card and the card that I'm happiest with. The only other non-tuners we play is the Wandering King Wildwind, and this guy is still really good to open. Remember, his special summoning condition is only if you control a Fiend tuner of 1500 or less, so all of your Synchrons fall into that. And you can control other monsters when that happens as well, so you can add him to your hand later in your combo. Even if you still have a few of your combo pieces up already, he's still live in your hand to be a special summon. And he does have a graveyard effect which can come up, but that graveyard effect can only be triggered during the end phase of a different turn after he was sent. And some duels are just not going to last that long, so it's not terribly important. But hard opening this guy is really good. If you already have the Synchron Resonator in hand, then it's a good search target off of Soul to give you another non-tuner body on field and allow you to extend a little bit further. So you're going to search this guy if you have a hand where you have opened Crimson, opened Bone, or you have access to Synchron in your hand already and you're firing the Soul effect off of Crimson Resonator search. So basically when you have no other targets to search, you're going to search Wildwind, and it's going to give you a lot of value. It's not just going to be a follow-up card for the following turn. You're going to get to play at that turn. The Obsessive Oovaloop. So this is a random Fiend tuner that has... I was contemplating as being part of the strategy for a while, but as the new cards got revealed and released, it became determined that this card is actually essential for combos involving a Bystial Dissipator. So you send it from deck to grave off a Bone Archfiend, and then you banish the Synchro from your graveyard to add it back from the graveyard to your hand. And then it has another hard once per turn effect where you banish the Synchro from your graveyard to special summon it from your hand to the field. And what that does is it puts 2 Synchros in banish, one of which you can revive to the field with this Bystial Dissipator, and the other one is fuel for Bystial Dissipator's negation effect on your opponent's turn. So, absolutely essential card there. It also lets you make Red Supernova Dragon in a scenario in which you've already made Hot Red and Bystial Dissipator, and you're able to modulate the level of one of your other guys down. I'll show that combo later. We have some basic hand traps. We've got Ash and Imperm, and some cross-out targets, Droll and Nibiru. Shifter, again, would have been nice the other night when I played this, because I basically automatically lost the game to Shifter, which is unfortunate. Hate that card, want it to be gone. Onto the spells, we have the 3 Resonator Call. It's a non-once per turn Rhoda for Resonator, is extremely good consistency tool in this deck. The Crimson Gaia is potentially a 3-of, depending on how you think of it. So it lets you search any card that mentions Red Dragon Archfiend by name. So what's interesting about that is if you're in a situation where you already have the red zone, it can add the Vision Resonator, because the Vision Resonator has that same effect of add a spell or trap that mentions Red Dragon Archfiend. So it, in and of itself, is also mentioning Red Dragon Archfiend, which means you can add this to your hand as an extender if you've already hard opened the red zone or something else has gone wrong during your combo. And so, for that reason, the Crimson Gaia is seen as like a 3-of, because it's just another search card. It's another piece of consistency. But the targets that it can search are not extremely broad, unfortunately, and that's one of the things I don't like about the mentions Red Dragon Archfiend text on these cards. I wish it was something more akin to, like I said, mentions a Dark Dragon Synchro monster, if they could find a way to phrase that where it would make sense with rulings. But it has another effect where if Red Dragon Archfiend by name battles, you get to flip down all of your opponent's monsters Book of Eclipse style, which can come up if you're battling with either Scarlight or Scar Red, because they're both treated as RDA on the field. And if you attack with the OG Red Dragon Archfiend and you flip everything down, his effect will trigger and destroy all of your opponent's monsters with his effect. An effect that is not very good by today's standards and can potentially ruin the rest of your setup if he doesn't battle, forcing you to fire the Soul Resonator Destruction Protection early, which you don't want to do. But in a situation where your opponent's monsters don't have any additional protection, and flipping them down and destroying them by a card effect will clear your opponent's entire board, it is kind of a nice extra little OTK enabler, so that is a strong point of the deck going second. Resonator Command is the spell that I mentioned can add any level 4 Fiend in the game to your hand. So I'm still on 3 of this, even though I've seen a lot of people cut it down to fewer copies. And also considering playing cards like Small World. And Small World may be a good consideration because if you need to pivot to a piece of non-engine or like you need to grab a Bystial or a Kaiju or something like that post-side, Small World might be better. But Resonator Command essentially does the same thing in terms of how many cards you commit to the search, because you're technically going -1, you're discarding a card, and you are using this card itself, and both Small World and Resonator Command result in the same thing. But I think just the ability to get literally any other card in your deck, if you open like 2 Soul, you can pitch one of the Souls to add a Crimson. If you don't open any of the non-tuners, it's a good way to search them. And there's a lot of hands where, unfortunately, as much as this deck is pretty consistent now with the new support, there are a lot of combos that you have to hard open the Bone Archfiend in order to go all the way with them. So it's an unfortunate reality that we need more consistency and more ways to search Bone Archfiend. And so this card is good for that. Another card that's good for is Pot of Prosperity. I'm hearing a lot of discourse around people being sick of this card lately and asking for it to be limited or banned. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Only time will tell. But this is a deck that can get away with playing it because you do have some redundant multiples or cards that, frankly, you're just never going to make in the extra deck that you can afford to sacrifice to go 6 cards deep and get whatever piece of combo you're missing. It's also good Ash bait because if you already have your full combo in hand, like if you already have Crimson and Bone and you have Prosperity, if you fire off the Prosperity first and it baits an Ash, you're insulated for the rest of your combo later on. So I think that it's 100% worth it in this deck for the sake of consistency, because you can afford to spare the cards in the extra deck, and going 6 deep is always going to be strong. I don't need to tell you guys why Pot of Prosperity is good. You already know. Triple tack, ideally this would be 2 thrust or maybe even 3 thrusts and a talents instead of the 3 talents, but that's what we're playing right now because I don't own any thrusts. And it is a good piece of non-engine and a good way to play through hand traps. I love this card. It's one of my favorite cards in the game right now. It's so unbelievably versatile. I already talked about Crossout Designator and how most people will probably opt not to play this, and they're not incorrect. I think that it is underperformed so far with what I've done with the deck, although I'm keeping it for a little while and just trying to make up my mind. I'm going to play it again on a more casual night at my locals and see how I feel about this, and then it's probably going to be cut. Call by the Grave is mandatory. Red Zone is a great new trap card. Not only is it an homage to the lyrics of the Clear Minds song from 5Ds, but it has a really good effect where if you control a RDA or a card that mentions it, you can pop a monster when your opponent you can pop any card when your opponent activates a monster effect. So it's another piece of interruption, and also allows you to negate Dark Ruler when you have Abyss up, because your opponent can go Dark Ruler. You can't respond with monster effects, but you can respond with a trap. So you can go activate Red Zone and then chain Abyss, targeting the Dark Ruler to negate it. And that is a way that your initial setup board is always going to be Dark Ruler proof no matter what. I actually used this to play around a Dharma Cannon in Labyrinth at local. So my opponent went to activate Dharma Cannon, and they had the big lady up, and so you can't respond to normal traps with monster effects when she's on the field. But I activated Crossout, just sending like Imperm or something, and then chained Abyss to Crossout, targeting the Dharma Cannon, and shut it off, bypassing the restriction of the Lady Labyrinth. So that was pretty cool. Imperm's another great card as well, like I mentioned. And then on to the extra deck. 3 Red Rising is mandatory because it is not a hard once per turn. The revival effect can be cycled more than once, and you may want to send a copy off of Prosperity if you have to. We have 1 level 7 that we summon in case we run into a situation where we have Soul and a level 4 non-tuner, the Wild Wind or the Bone Archfiend, and for whatever reason we can't use the Bone Archfiend to modulate the level. And so the only thing we can go into is a 7. Kui Belt the Blade Dragon lets you pop a card on summon, so it's a decent level 7 to go into, and is way better than like Ancient Pixie Dragon or whatever crap people were playing before this. 2 of the original RDA and 2 of the Scar Red. So going first, if you synchro off the Scar Red into something like Abyss or Bystial Dissipator, it floats into the original, giving you another level 8 body. This is kind of a replacement for Chaos Ruler being banned. But going second, you do the same thing, and it will also destroy all of your opponent's attack position monsters, which is a nice in-archetype board wipe that you always have access to because it's in your extra deck, and it's incredibly easy to access. So if your opponent doesn't have any protection from destruction like that, they could potentially lose their whole board to you going second, and you can just easily OTK from there. It's really quite strong. And again, the fact that it replaces itself with another level 8 body, you would never play the original RDA for its actual effect. You would just play it because this one floats into it, necessitating it and making it a free body you can take advantage of. We are on one Scarlight because it does have the effect where we can win in time. It has the effect to destroy difficult to destroy monsters that have low attack on your opponent's side of the field because they have either battle protection or some nasty effects. It forces out certain interruptions. It's also treated as RDA while on the field, so it can be used with some of the other pieces of support we have in here, like I talked about. I really wish I could be on more than one Abyss. Abyss is great, and in a simplified game state, I wish that I had a second copy in the extra deck, and maybe I will find room for one. There's a couple of things I would consider cutting or changing in which I can find room for a second one. But Abyss is crazy, as you guys know. It can negate anything on the field, and it has a very specific way in which it negates things, which is really nice. It is also extremely easy to go into by combining either Soul and Red Rising, or Synchron and Scar Red. And you can even go into it and then banish it off of the Obsessive Oovaloop. And you can go into it, synchro for Bystial Dissipator with Synchron Resonator, banish it for Obsessive Oovaloop, and bring it back to the field as part of a combo we do. And Abyss is, even though it is a well-known strong synchro monster that Crusadia and Dragon Link decks know very well for the last 4 years or so, it is stronger in this archetype than outside of it, because it has another effect when it battles, where it can special summon Resonator from the graveyard, which is kind of nice. Bane, I don't really care for. Bane is basically just a beater. You contribute another monster to special summon a RDA from the graveyard. So you can synchro up from Abyss into Bane and then tribute another Resonator to bring back Abyss, but like, what did you really benefit from that aside from a 3,500 body that doesn't really do a whole lot? So I don't really care for Bane, but there are some end boards that he is included on just because it's like, okay, well, I can't go much further, but I can still establish my interruptions plus another beater for next turn. But generally, he doesn't really do a whole lot, and he might be one I would consider cutting for another Abyss. Bystial Dissipator is the most essential non-archetype Dark Dragon Synchro that we can go into. I was so excited when this card was announced because most of this deck, like I said, locks you into Dark Dragon Synchros. Some of them lock you into Dark Synchros, some of them Dark Dragon Synchros, and Bystial Dissipator is both of those things. It gives you another negate, synergizes incredibly well with the rest of the archetype, is very easy to make at a level 10, and the Bystial version of this deck benefits from it even more so. I've got Baroness in there because there are instances, especially on the crackback, where you can make it, even though I very, very rarely make it, and sometimes I send it off of Prosperity. A lot of times you're locked out of it and you can't make it, but going on the crackback, if you open, like, let's say most of your board got broken, but you have, like, Scar Red still on the field, you can just drop, like, a Vision and go for Baroness or something like that. And so I think it's worth including in there, but it's another consideration to cut for like a second Abyss or something like that. King Calamity. King Calamity will probably get banned pretty soon here because of Crimson Dragon, which is unfortunate. But it is a nice way to shut off all of the effects in your opponent's field. But the problem with it is there's no way to abuse its effect like other decks that play the Crimson Dragon can do, like the Manadium deck, because there's no way to summon it on your opponent's turn. I will talk about the card Burning Soul that lets you summon it on your opponent's turn, but there's no way to search Burning Soul, and I wish they had introduced one, but maybe they did that to not make it obscenely overpowered, because if there was a way to search Burning Soul and resolve it every time on your opponent's turn, this deck would just be Calamity Lock Turbo, and it would basically be unbeatable if that combo goes through correctly. And then, of course, Red Supernova Dragon. is a card that ends games on its own. It will usually be 6,000 or 65 when it hits the field. It can dodge Nibiru in a way, because even though it can't negate Nibiru, when your opponent activates it, it banishes itself and protects itself, so it can come back to the field later. One of the things I've been frustrated about with Red Supernova since he's come out is the fact that he takes an actual eternity to return to the field. It's the end phase of the turn after you do it. And so you have to play through a whole turn without access to him. And I honestly feel like he could have come back during like your opponent's end phase, and you could have had him on your following turn, and it still would not have been overpowered. I don't know why they had to nerf him that hard by making him take so long to come back to the field. But there actually are a couple of ways we can circumvent that. So Bystial Dissipator can special summon him back. I believe Red Zone can do it as well. And then Assault Synchron is a tech choice you could play that can also summon him back to get him back early before his actual effect fully resolves. That being said, again, if your opponent has something that's going to try to out your board, and you want to just trigger him to not only banish your opponent's stuff, but to protect him so he comes back later, it's not a bad way to go. And his only major weakness is stuff like Kaijus and Lava Golem. I actually had a Labyrinth player at Locals Lava Golem over both him and Abyss, and I just went to battle with the remaining monster, I think it was Dissipator, and the Lava Golem, and just killed him. But that is his main weakness, as are all like high rolly, high investment super boss monsters like that. They're going to lose to things like Kaijus and Lava Golem. It's just kind of a matter of fact. Okay, so let's go over some combos. So there is a 1-card combo with just Soul Resonator and any discard. So it's like a 1.5 card combo, technically, if you want to quantify it that way. So we just need anything to discard, and we're going to have to normal summon out the Soul Resonator. So we'll go ahead and normal summon that, and it's going to add to hand the Bone Archfiend. Next, we have to activate the Bone Archfiend effect, discarding our card to special summon it out of our hand. And now we need to activate the Bone Archfiend effect on the field, targeting either itself or the Soul Resonator to reduce their levels down. And we're going to send the Crimson Resonator from deck to grave. So let's say we chose Soul Archfiend, so this is or Soul Resonator. This is now level 2, now a level 4, as always. So we'll go ahead and Synchro 6 right there into the Red Rising Dragon. And Red Rising Dragon is going to revive the Crimson Resonator that we pitched off of Bone Archfiend. And so now the conditions are met. We control Dark Dragon Synchro. Crimson Resonator is going to special summon 2 Resonators out of the deck, Vision and Synchron. And then from here, we can Synchro up into the new Scar Red Dragon Archfiend using the level 2 and the level 6. And I guess it can go anywhere. And then Vision Resonator is going to add to hand because it was Synchro Summoned. It's going to add the Crimson Gaia spell. And then we can go ahead and activate the Crimson Gaia spell and add the Red Zone or the Fiendish Golem, depending on if you're playing that. We'll talk about that card a little bit later. And then we can go Synchron Resonator into Scar Red for Abyss. And Synchron Resonator is going to activate, adding the Vision Resonator back. Actually, we can go Chainlink 1, Scar Red, Chainlink 2, Synchron. Synchron is going to add back to hand the Vision. And then Chainlink 1, Scar Red is going to float into the original Red Dragon Archfiend. And so then from here, because we control a... We can actually hold this for next turn. We don't actually have to fire this right now if we want to keep a card in hand. We can go ahead and just Synchro these two for the Bystial Dissipator. And you can either, doesn't matter what zone, doesn't really matter what position unless you're trying to play around Lightning Storm. So this is an Omni Negate, potentially a Monster Negate, and then a Pop as well. Now, we don't have anything banished, so the only way to get something banished from this position in order for Dissipator to be online would be to trigger the Soul Resonator effect to banish itself to protect our guys. So if your opponent tries to destroy one of your cards and you banish this to protect, you now have fuel in the graveyard for Bystial Dissipator. So not a great setup, but it is not bad for a 1-card combo. And as you can see, not opening Crimson Resonator is not generally where you want to be. Having to normal summon it can lead to awkward setups like this. Another thing you can do going second is, instead of summoning Dissipator right here, you can go for Bane. And we can still special summon out the Vision Resonator. And we can activate Bane's effect, tribute it to resurrect one of our other RDAs. We can go back for this one, and then OTK with not over 9,000 damage right there. Although that would imply that your opponent has no disruptions and nothing that floats. When we synchroed off the Scar Red Dragon Archfiend, it also destroyed all of our opponent's attack position monsters, and more than likely that's not going to completely clear your opponent's board, but it will force out some interruptions. So that's generally what you can do with just Soul Resonator going first or second, but there are a lot of better combos we can do with some other cards. All right, let's take a look at a 2-card combo. This is specifically opening the Crimson Resonator and the Bone Archfiend, or some way to get to one of these two. So being able to normal summon the Bone Archfiend and basically use it as a non-tuner body twice is where we ideally want to be. So we hard open the Crimson, so we control nothing, we can special summon it out, and then normal the Bone Archfiend. And then we can just go ahead and synchro for 6 for Red Rising, as you guys know and love. Activate the Red Rising, revive the Crimson. Crimson effect is special summon 2 Resonators from deck. We're going to grab Vision and Soul here. And Soul has not had a chance to activate yet, so we'll activate Soul and search out Synchron. And next we can, we'd have to have another card in hand to discard, so let's just say we had that Resonator command again. So we'll activate the Resonator command, discarding it to special summon back the Bone Archfiend. And then Bone Archfiend effect targeting Crimson reduces level to 1, and pitch the Obsessive Uva Loop from the deck. And we have that now in the graveyard. So from here, we can go ahead and synchro for 9. So we can go Soul and Red Rising into Abyss. And we can special summon out Synchron Resonator and just go Synchron and Abyss into Bystial Dissipator. And Synchron is going to add back to hand. It doesn't really matter. It could be Soul, because we're going to discard that later. From here, we can go ahead and synchro the 2 and the 4 for another copy of Red Rising Dragon. Once again, it's not once per turn, so Red Rising will revive, not a level 2 this time, but a level 1. It will revive the Synchron Resonator. And then Vision Resonator will add from deck to hand. And you could do that whenever chain link order you want. You could go Chain Link 1 Red Rising, Chain Link 2 Vision Resonator, and search the spell first, or right the way around. So we add the Crimson Gaia. We can go ahead and activate that and get the red zone. From here, we can use the Obsessive Uva Loop in the graveyard, banishing the Abyss to add it from grave back to hand. And then we can banish again the Red Rising to summon it from hand to field. So now we have 3 tuners, and remember this one was reduced to level 1, so we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we can go ahead and make Red Supernova here, and this is just the dream right here, right? Like, this is what you want to be able to do. You want to be able to make Red Supernova alongside the other boss monsters in this deck. The other prior to this new support, you were basically just ending on this guy and no backup, no support. Bystial Dissipator will go ahead and activate and summon back the Abyss. So this is our best board. Oh, and the Synchron Resonator as well will add back the Vision, which we haven't summoned with its own in-hand effect, but we don't have any additional bodies to do so. So if you wanted to, if you had space in your monster zones, before you committed to all of that, if you also had Wild Wind, you could special Wild Wind while you still controlled. Actually, yeah, if you have Wild Wind in hand, in addition to all of this, let's say you went full combo and you still have Wild Wind in hand, Vision Resonator is now live to be a special summon. So you can special Vision, and you can special Wild Wind, and we can go Synchro 6 yet again into yet another Red Rising, and activate its effect, special summoning back the Vision, I suppose, and then the Synchro for 8 for the Scar Red, which just gets us another body on board and makes the red zone where we can pop something. And, you know, given the opportunity next turn, you could synchro this off for, you know, a Bane or whatever and make your opponent's entire field blow up. So if you have the Wild Wind in hand in addition to that setup, you can also end on yet another guy. But this is pretty darn powerful and is my favorite combo we like to do with this deck. So it does require opening Crimson, and hands in which you're not able to open Crimson or you can't normal summon the Bone Archfiend are just inherently suboptimal and don't let you get to setups like this. So that's why we play all the consistency tools we have, because we want to be able to do higher rolly combos like this more often. So we showed off a 1-card combo with just Soul Resonator. That combo is similar but a little bit different if you also hard opened the Crimson but you're forced to normal summon Soul. It is almost the same thing. The difference in the trade-off is that we are ending with Bystial Dissipator's Negate live, but we do not have the trap. So it's an interesting trade-off there. So this is what I mean as far as like not opening the Bone Archfiend or a way to get to it is just incredibly suboptimal and has me very concerned about the long-term longevity of this deck in a tournament, but let's go for it. So if we control nothing, again, we can special out the Crimson. Unfortunately, we need to normal the Soul Resonator. And again, we're just going to say we have this in hand for discard, and we're going to add to hand that Bone Archfiend. We'll go ahead and activate the Bone Archfiend effect, pitching our card in hand to special summon itself out. We'll go ahead and activate its effect now, changing the Soul Resonator from a 3 to a 2 and sending to graveyard the Oovaloop. And then we can go ahead and Synchro 6 right here into Red Rising Dragon. So the reason I'm doing this little experiment is you may be tempted to fire off the Crimson Resonator and special summon it while you control nothing, and then you're still forced to normal Soul because you don't have the Bone Archfiend. And then you get into a situation like this where it's like, do you just not activate the effect of Red Rising in order to make sure Crimson is online? Because if we use Red Rising to revive Soul, then we can't activate the effect of Crimson because we control more than just the Dark Dragon Synchro. However, when I actually gave it more than 5 seconds of thought, I realized you can just Synchro 9 right here with the Soul, which is now back to being level 3 because it was revived from the graveyard, and go straight into Abyss. And now we can fire the Crimson Resonator, getting ourselves the other 2 Synchrons from deck. The only problem here is a lack of any other non-tuner bodies. So we can go Synchron into Abyss to make Dissipator, and Synchron add back the Soul, and then we can go Oovaloop effect, banishing the Abyss to add it from grave back to hand, and then Oovaloop effect again, banishing the Red Rising to special summon to the field. I'm like thinking this through even more as I'm going through it. So from here we have a couple of options. So we can either just use the Dissipator effect to special summon back the Abyss, and then we are ending on this negate and this negate because we still have the Red Rising banished, but we never got to search the spell in the trap because we never got to synchro with Vision, and these tuner bodies are just kind of weak on board. So that's a little bit suboptimal, but that's what happens when you don't open the Bone Archfiend. Or alternatively, what we can do is instead of summoning back the Abyss, we can summon back the Red Rising Dragon, and here we can go 6 and 2 for the Scar Red, and the Vision will go ahead and add the spell, which will add the trap. Crimson into Scar Red for Bane, and the Scar Red will float into the original RDA. We can use the Bane effect, tributing the Oovaloop to summon back the Scar Red. If we pass on this, we would want to have left the Soul Resonator in graveyard earlier so we can banish it for protection, because then on our opponent's turn we can fire off the other effect of Red Zone, which literally just lets you special summon back a banished Dragon Synchro. So we can fire that off and special summon back the Abyss, And during the end phase, the original Red Dragon Archfiend is going to attempt to destroy all of our monsters that didn't battle, and we can banish the Soul Resonator to protect them if we didn't add it back off of Synchron. And then we have a banish card for this negate to be live. So we found a way in order to keep this negate live, and we have a ton of other bodies now. So I guess that opening wasn't all that bad to begin with. Let's go back to that 2-card combo I showed off earlier where you hard open the Crimson and the Bone Archfiend, or some way to get to both of them through our various searchers, and show an alternate way to get to that same board that goes through Red Supernova at an earlier stage and lets you end with an additional body on board, although that additional body doesn't really do anything for you. We'll go ahead and show it off. It's just a little bit different of a flavor of the same 2-card combo. So we control nothing, so we'll special Crimson with normal Bone Archfiend. We will go ahead and Synchro 6 for Red Rising. So far, it is the same. Will Red Rising revive the Crimson? Crimson effect, special summon 2 Resonators from deck. We will get Vision and Soul, as expected. Soul will activate and add to hand Synchron. And, of course, we still have to have the card in hand to discard for Bone. And we will go ahead and special summon out the Synchron. And right here, we're just going to go straight for Red Supernova Dragon. We're going to go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we'll do these 3 tuners here. So we will go Chainlink 1. Well, let me put the Red Supernova on the field first. We'll go Chainlink 1, Synchron, Chainlink 2, Vision. So Vision will add, of course, the Crimson Gaia. And Synchron will add back the Vision. So we'll go ahead and fire off the Crimson Gaia, add the Red Zone as always, and then we will special summon out the Vision because we control level 5 or higher. We'll activate the Bone Archfiend Engrave, discarding our 1 card to special summon him back out. We'll activate his effect targeting the Vision to reduce it to level 1 and send the Oovaloop from deck to grave. So far, seemed pretty familiar, just a little bit of a different setup. And then we will Synchro 6 yet again with the Crimson and the Bone Archfiend for another copy of Red Rising. Red Rising will activate again, reviving the Soul. And then we will go straight into Abyss with a 3 and a 6. Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss. And remember, we reduced this level down to 1, so we can go Synchro 1 and 9 for 10 for Dissipator. And then we can go with the Oovaloop effect, banishing the Abyss to add from graveyard to hand, and then banishing the Red Rising to go from hand to field. And then we can go ahead and we can do one of 2 things here. So if we're going first and we want to establish negates, we can fire off the Dissipator, summoning back the Abyss to get its powerful negate live. Or if we wanted to make another level 10 for whatever reason, let's say we're going second, we just want to push for more damage, we can, instead of summoning back the Abyss, summon back the Red Rising, and we have a level 4 tuner here to make another 10, such as Bane. So we can do either of those 2 things. So that is the exact same setup, but we just played it out a little bit differently. It's those exact 2 cards. It is Crimson plus Bone, and then any discard, and it gets us this exact same setup, but it's a little bit better because the other combo didn't end with the Oovaloop still on the field. Although the Oovaloop doesn't do anything, we didn't have to use it to perform the Synchro Summon. We just sequenced it a different way and ended on something as good, if not a little bit more powerful. It just depends on how you want to do it. There's really no other benefit to going into Red Supernova early, because it doesn't protect you from Nibiru, of course. It just dodges Nibiru itself. And then there are certain other cards that this card is just unaffected by. If you are going second and you're trying to push for damage like this with this exact setup, the sooner you get Red Supernova out, the sooner you can chain it to whatever disruptions your opponent has and banish their entire field, clearing it off for the damage for the rest of your monsters. Alright, so let's now talk about some cards that are up for consideration for the strategy, but may be suboptimal in some circumstances, but just have synergy with the deck and are worth considering. Normally what these cards are used for is You reveal them in hand, you discard a card, they special summon themselves and their respective tuner from deck, and they're meant to make the Sun Dragon and Moon Dragon from the 5Ds anime. But what you're probably going to be using them for, Ascator Dawnwalker was very popular for making specifically Chaos Ruler in Synchro Toolbox builds about a year ago, and Supay Duskwalker can be used to make Red Rising Dragon or other level 6 synchros. The problem with using Ascator Dawnwalker in this strategy is that you can't go straight for an 8 that gives you a whole lot of benefit, because Scar Red requires dark monsters, whereas Red Rising does not. So Supay is a little bit more useful here. However, you have to also already have a Resonator in grave, otherwise going straight into Red Rising Dragon is not going to really give you that much benefit. But it's a nice little consistency tool there. If something happens with one of your cards and you have a Resonator in graveyard, maybe you use it on the crackback, like you use it on turn 3, and you summon it out instantly and make a Red Rising Dragon, and you're able to recycle one of your Resonator effects in graveyard like Crimson or Soul, it can be pretty good. So these cards are worth considering, but mainly the Supay Duskwalker at this point, unless you're playing exactly Common Charity, which we will talk about, and then Ascator Dawnwalker is up for consideration. And of course, we have to talk about the Bystials. So of course, they have enormous synergy with this strategy, almost like they've warped the design of any and all dragon decks for the rest of their existence. Kind of reminds me of a certain other dragon sub-archetype we had about a decade ago. Anyway, I digress. They're extremely powerful in this deck, and the Bystial version of the strategy may become the more dominant, more competitive version of the deck. And a lot of your combos are going to be pretty simple. I don't really feel the need to go through a bunch of Bystial-related combos. But one of the cool things I wanted to mention is, and a lot of people don't seem to be talking about this, but it's a very powerful thing you can do with the Bystials. So if you open Soul Resonator and Lubellion, you can go through a little bit of a combo with Soul. You can summon it, get your Bone, discard for Bone, summon it, make Red Rising, have Red Rising summon the 2 tuners out of the deck, and then synchro into Scar Red with Soul and Synchron on the field. So you have your you have a level 3 and a level 1 tuner, and you have Scar Red, and then you would activate Lubellion, discarding itself to add Magnamut or whatever, banishing the Bone Archfiend from graveyard to summon the Magnamut, tributing it to summon back the Lubellion from the graveyard, and activating Lubellion's effect to set this card directly on the field. So you're probably used to activating either Branded Regained or Branded Beast off of Lubellion, and those cards are still going to be played in this Bystial version of the strategy. But Etude of the Branded lets us perform a Synchro Summon on our opponent's turn, and your opponent cannot imperm it with turn player priority on their turn like they could if it was Crimson Dragon. So you are able to Calamity Lock on your opponent's turn. I had talked about the card Burning Soul earlier, which is a card that also lets you summon Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity on your opponent's turn. But this card, there's no way to search it. There's no in-archetype way. And it's an unfortunate design setback with a lot of these Red Dragon Archfiend and Resonator support cards, is they didn't decide to go with the mentions Red Dragon Archfiend by name line of text until the structure deck era support. So stuff like this that was printed before that, unfortunately, does not have that clause and is not searchable. But if you're playing specifically the Bystial version, being able to activate Etude of the Branded from deck with Lubellion will let you Calamity Lock your opponent, which is pretty cool. Assault Synchron is another consideration, considering he's a level 2 tuner that summons himself from hand pretty much for free, and he also has an effect that can summon back a banished dragon synchro. So similar to what I was talking about with either being able to use the effect of Bystial Dissipator or the Red Zone to summon back your Red Supernova Dragon early. Assault Synchron can do the same thing, and it's another great extender that you could potentially consider playing. Fiendish Golem is a trap card included in the structure deck that we mentioned, and this card does have a pretty decent on-field effect. It banishes a monster with 2,000 or more attack. That can be your own monster to protect it, or it can be your opponent's monster to get rid of it for the time being, and then it can search out a Fiendish Chain. So this card is searchable off of Crimson Gaia or Soul Resonator. so accessing it is pretty easy, but you typically want to get the red zone first. So I chose to not play these two over playing more non-engine like the tactics and the crossouts, although I'm very much considering playing this package, because if you play, especially if you play Crimson Gaia at 3, then you're always going to see the red zone no matter what, so you want to have something else to search off of Soul Resonator. So being able to have both red zone and this set gives a lot more power to your end board. And then of course Fiendish Chain is a very old school trap negate. It's one of Jack Atlas's cards from the anime that actually saw lots of play in the TCG competitively, so it is nice that we get to search it and set it straight from the field to the set it straight from the deck to the field. So this package is worth considering. If you guys know anything about my history with this strategy, you know that Red Rain is a card that I have a lot of mixed feelings about and I've had some controversy with. So Red Rain seems incredibly powerful on paper. It does have an effect very similar to Red Supernova Dragon, where it can banish your opponent's entire field. However, it can also banish your monsters, because it banishes all monsters except for the one with the highest attack, which is probably going to be one of your monsters, but not all of them. So it doesn't really play nicely with your end board, but it is a powerful consideration. It is available at common from a tin reprint and in the structure deck, so it is something we can play in the common charity version of the deck, where you don't have the new support and the additional extenders to end on more than one powerful synchro. You might just end on the original Red Nova Dragon impasse, and this is a good piece of support for that, because the original Red Nova Dragon does not have the mass banish effect that Red Supernova Dragon has, and Red Supernova is not available at common. But it is a card worth considering, but I don't see any way in which we can really get it to synergize. And the same thing with this other trap here, Time to Stand Up. So this was actually printed for the first time in the TCG earlier this year in Maze, but was reprinted at common for the structure deck. And this card's on-field effect, when it's activated, is not that great. It's pretty high-rolly, and you'll never really get it to resolve. But its graveyard effect is straight up just an additional piece of interruption. It's a monster negate by banishing itself from your graveyard while you control one of those synchro monsters. And that is incredibly powerful. But there doesn't really seem to be a way to easily get these into the grave without main decking Foolish Burial Goods. There was a fiend that I considered playing that was Proofiness, the Tactical Trapper, which can banish a trap from your deck, but there's really no way to easily get it from the banish into the grave. It gets it from like banish to your hand or to the field, but like I said, the on-field effect of Time to Stand Up is not very good. You really want to send it straight to the graveyard and use that negate effect. And then these you would send to the Red Rain, you'd probably try to pitch in the graveyard, because it does have the ability to add itself back and be somewhat recurable. So these are powerful cards in the archetype, but do not have a way to consistently be utilized by the current version of the strategy. Chaos Angel is an extremely powerful dark attribute synchro monster, as you guys should be well aware of. And there are times, especially in the Bystial version of the strategy in a simplified game state, where you may want to go for this guy because you don't have access to any resonators. But a Bystial plus one of your level 4 Fiends does equal this guy. So if you don't have any resonators, but you do have a level 6 Bystial and the Bone Archfiend, you can easily get to this guy before you're locked into Dark Dragon synchros, or by utilizing some of the cards that lock you into Dark synchros but not Dark Dragon synchros. It's very weird how they do that, because some of Jack Atlas's synchro monsters are fiends, such as Dark Highlander, but they didn't bother to include a Dark Highlander in the structure deck, interestingly enough. But yeah, Chaos Angel is worth considering, but not every version of the deck can play it. But I would definitely say consider playing it for the Bystial version. Now I want to talk about some other level 4 Fiends that are searchable in this deck due to Soul Resonator and Resonator Command, that are suboptimal maybe compared to what we've been playing, but are worth considering, just so you guys understand the breadth of synergy and potential strategies that are out there for this strategy. So Skullmeister is just straight up a hand trap, and not a bad one at that, and he's completely searchable in this strategy. So maybe if you wanted to include him as a one-of, search him off of search him off of Soul Resonator or Resonator Command. He is another level 4 Fiend body you could normal summon in combination with Crimson Resonator and still do your full combo, but then if you have him in hand, he is, like I said, a piece of interruption. So that seems pretty powerful. Red Familiar was a card that was released alongside Crimson Resonator and Resonator Command, but it's not nearly as good. It has some weird graveyard effect to modulate levels or something like that, but it's never really going to come up. It's a reference to the anime. It's essentially the little spirit thing that allowed Jack to get a Red Nova Dragon, but this guy's probably not going to see a whole lot of play, but he was considered as a one-of prior to the new support. Red Sprinter was one of the better level 4 non-tuner fiend monsters as part of this strategy prior to the new support. On normal, he can special summon a level 3 or lower fiend tuner from your hand or graveyard, which can allow you to consider him for the follow-up if you search him later on in your duel on turn 3 or later. You can revive a guy from the graveyard instead of just being a summon from hand. But due to the way that Crimson Resonator works, as well as Wandering King Wildwind and even Red Resonator, there was some contradictory synergy going on there, and so this guy was cut pretty much immediately when the new support was announced. He's pretty obsolete when you consider what Crimson Resonator and Bone Archfiend do, but maybe is worth considering, like I said, as a normal summon on turn 3 to revive your Soul Resonator from graveyard and get another search off of it. So it's worth considering for that reason. Bet you've never seen this card before. So this is Votis. It's a level 4 fiend that once again can be searched with the same cards I've already mentioned. And when it is sent to the graveyard, you get to excavate 3 cards off the top of your deck. And if you get a monster, you can banish a copy of that same monster from your deck to add the revealed copy to your hand. And so it's a way to dig for extenders. If you special summon Crimson Resonator and normal this guy and synchro them off for Red Rising, let's say you excavate off the top of your deck a Synchron Resonator or a Vision Resonator, you would get to add one of those to hand, and then it's an extender. So it's not the worst thing in the world. Well, hell, you could even do it with Bone Archfiend, but I even was considering this in the deck as a one-of. It's something that I think has potentially a lot of value there, but being able to excavate 3 has a lot of randomness to it, and so the general unreliability of that, I decided not to include it. But if it ever gets reprinted as a common later on, it might be something worth playing around for the common charity version of the deck. Salamander Catalyzer. So this card, again, was previously printed at common in Darkwing Blast, but is now an Ultra thanks to the Megatins. This card sees a lot of play in the Dark World strategy because it is a body in and of itself, and it enables all of your Dark World cards, so it's extremely powerful in that deck, but potentially has some synergy here because it is a level 4 fiend that does have the ability to special summon itself out from hand, or special summon out a different fiend from hand by discarding itself. So in a weird hand where you have the Bone Archfiend in hand and you don't want to, you've already had a normal summon Soul Resonator or something like that, and you still want to be able to use the revival effect of Bone Archfiend later, this might be a consideration. But the discard is kind of hefty for what you're trying to accomplish with this deck, and just the Bone Archfiend and the Wildwind accomplish the same thing anyway, but it's a pretty cool card that may have applications in the future, who knows. And if for any reason anyone wants to experiment around with this strategy and wants to do something that requires a lot more level 4 bodies or something like that, Aratama is a level 4 fiend that can be searched off of Soul Resonator and Resonator Command, and Aratama gives you access to Sakitama, which is one of the best level 4 extenders in the game. It's a level 4 body that normal summons it without using your normal summon, and is generally used for enabling rank 4s with the 2 monsters combined, but you could always enable synchros with it as well if you have tuner bodies as well. There doesn't seem to be a need for this in the strategy right now, but it's worth considering that Aratama is searchable. The 2 Labyrinth Servants are level 4 fiends as well, so they also have synergy with this strategy, which opens up the possibility of a Resonator Labyrinth deck, because that is a strategy that has lots of generic fiend synergy. And so with this in mind, fiends as a type got a massive, massive boost in generic power this year with this structure deck. But this strategy, while it seems very promising, is still in its infancy, and I'm planning to follow this up with another video later talking about the Labyrinth Resonator strategy in specific, because it seems like it has a lot of potential, but it isn't clear at this stage if it's going to be better than playing either of those 2 strategies pure. but it is, like I said, worth considering that both of the Labyrinth Servants are level 4, and as a result are searchable in the Resonator strategy and do have some incidental synergies. Being able to build a board of synchros and still set the rest of your hand for Labyrinth setup seems pretty darn strong, so we'll see what that develops into. Finally, I wanted to talk about some optional synchro choices in the extra deck. These are both suboptimal for a competitive constructed version of the deck now, but are basically staples in the common charity version, which I will do a separate video on as well. It may be the same video as the Labyrinth video, it may not, I haven't quite decided yet. But Bystials was one of the best level 8 Dark Dragon synchros you could go into prior to the structure deck, because we did not have Scarlight at common, and now we do. But he's a difficult monster to get rid of, but he doesn't really do anything in terms of the current metagame, because all he does is have protection for himself. He doesn't put any real pressure on your opponent, so your opponent's going to find a way to crack back and out this guy pretty easily in the modern day. But a very legendary card that's a force to be reckoned with. And then Void Ogre Dragon has a very powerful spell and trap negate that he can do once per turn, and is easy to make in this deck as well. He's a level 8 synchro that requires a Dark Tuner and a non-tuner Dark monster, which we're easily able to facilitate with the in-archetype cards in this strategy. However, if you are relying on the fact that you're going to have no cards in hand, that is not a situation you want to be in unless you're playing exactly Infernity, and if Infernity was that good, people would be playing it more often anyway. So if you're kind of creating another problem to solve another problem, if you are routinely ending with no cards in your hand just to make the spell and trap negate of this guy live. So these are both basically staples in the common charity version, but are not likely going to see play anytime soon in a constructed, modern constructive competitive version of the deck.
So that's going to about do it for this deck primer on Red Dragon Archfiend / Resonator. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm planning to do several more of these, mainly on what I would consider my pet decks. So things like Dragoonity and Noble Knight / Infernoble, giving me an opportunity to share the history of this archetype, and if it is a deck that has seen play in the past, go into more detail about what it looked like. This particular strategy doesn't really have a history of play, so that segment was relatively short, but I'm really looking forward to fleshing that out in some of the later videos. Some of the other ones is like Rika, Ancient Warriors as well, like some pet decks and stuff like that. So definitely look forward to those, and I will see you guys next time. I am also, like I said, looking forward to making sort of a part 2 to this that will talk about the Labyrinth version and the common charity version, so stay tuned for that.